Okay, this is the first part of your lymphatic system. I'm going to divide it up into two. So this is part one for a lymphatic system. The system functions to keep the body alive and healthy. It consists of a fluid called lymph. Let's put it over here. A network of lymphatic vessels and specialized cells called lymphocytes. 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 Now I can put this picture up here too. You can see all these lymph vessels and nodes in the body here, and lymphoid tissues and organs. So we're going to look over some of those on the following slides. Now it says lymph is the tissue fluid now in the lymph vessel. So when you look at this little image here, you can see, here's the pointer, here's the arterial capillaries. They have a high pressure. The tissues have a lower pressure, so fluids leak out. That's interstitial fluid that's going to deliver nutrients to the cells, oxygen and nutrients, and remove carbon dioxide and cellular waste, metabolic waste. It's going to be picked up by venous capillaries and lymphatic capillaries. Now when it enters into the lymph capillaries, it's called lymph. So that's your bold print word there. Lymph, the tissue now in the lymph vessel. So tissue fluid now in the lymph vessel is called lymph. It's 95% water. So about plasma is 92%, lymph is 95%. It has to do with the amount of proteins. There are very, very few proteins in the interstitial fluid, and so what's absorbed is mostly water. This is the lymph system, contains lymphocytes, that means lymph cells, and phagocytes, those are phagocytic cells. Lymph, the fluid in here, contains a high waste content, a lot of urea, carbon dioxide, cellular materials, this type of stuff. Colorless to yellow. Contains a few granulocytes, but no platelets. No platelets because platelets are in the blood. Platelets stay in the arterial capillaries. They do not come out. Just fluids come out containing electrolytes and gases and nutrients, stuff like that. Contains a few granulocytes but no platelets. A ruptured vessel, a ruptured lymph vessel, empties the lymph back into tissues and other vessels pick it up. So if you've ever been hit and it puffs up for a while, some lymphatics were broken and then it goes down as they're drained off into other lymphatics. Now, looking again up here, here's arterial capillaries. So when lymph vessels there, it says fluids leave arterial capillaries and enter the tissues. The lymph vessels carry the lymph from the peripheral tissues to the venous system. It's all being driven by pressure gradient. See, I put higher pressure in the arterial capillaries, lower pressure in the interstitial space, and the lowest pressure is in the venous capillaries and lymph capillaries. So on your picture you can see how it moves. It's a pressure gradient from high to low. From high to low. Now lymph vessels. Lymph vessels resemble veins but have thinner walls. Thinner walls. The walls are thinner than capillaries. They have more valves than veins. Now their valves, you can hardly see it on this picture here. There's a little valve there. They only show it on one very well. So that's a little valve. So they have more valves. They start or originate as blind pockets. Here's the beginning of one right here. Just a blind blunt tip. And you can see elsewhere on this drawing on the upper right, they're just little blunt tips where they start. They are larger in diameter than capillaries. Okay, so they have thinner walls than veins, and they're larger than capillaries. Larger than capillaries. Small lymphatics that are in the villi, the little finger-like projections that make the intestinal lining look like velvet, small lymphatics in the villi are called lacteals. And here it is, I circled it. Lacteal. This is a villus. There are 5 villi here you can see, and only one of them is opened up, and you can see the arterial and venous capillaries in there, as well as the lymphatic vessel called a lacteal that's going to absorb nutrients from your digestive tract, just like the capillaries will. They'll absorb nutrients also. They contain nodes. Now, here's some nodes here, and you can see on this person that we were looking at. Here's some nodes in him, in the armpit, in the groin, in the neck. So you can see these nodes all around here. They're lined with phagocytes. So the nodes are lined with phagocytes. PHAGOCYTES. And B, lymphocytes, to cleanse the extracellular fluid before it returns to the blood. Now, that extracellular fluid is actually called lymph, right? The valves keep the lymph moving one direction. So here's some lymph valves. You see how they just flip open and then they close shut. Flip open, close shut. And you can see that there are a whole bunch of them in the lymphatics, because remember, there are more valves in lymphatics than there are in veins. The one-way valves keep lymph moving toward the thoracic cavity, toward the heart. So they're going to be moving toward the heart. Respiratory movements cause a change in the pressure gradient in the thoracic duct. When you inhale, that increases the volume, decreases the pressure, and it sucks on the lymphatic walls of those vessels and makes them swell. And then when you exhale, that decreases the volume, which increases the pressure, and it forces the lymph in those ducts to move forward, and it returns to your subclavian veins back into your bloodstream. So breathing helps move lymph toward the heart, and muscle contraction does too, just like it did in the veins. Superficial lymphatics found in the subcutaneous layer of the skin, just right below the skin. The loose connective tissue of the mucous membranes lining the digestive tract, urinary, respiratory, and reproductive tracts, and the loose connective tissue of the serous membranes of the pleural, pericardial, and peritoneal cavities. Remember, that's anywhere that the serous membrane is found. Pleura is around lungs, pericardium is around the heart, and peritoneum is in the abdominal cavity. And you can see that the lymphatic nodes are all over the place. Deep lymphatics, larger lymphatics located in the skeletal muscle and other organs of the neck, limbs, trunk, and visceral organs. If you're sick and you go to the doctor and you haven't been feeling good, you got a fever, there are several areas that the doctor will check. And one is up under your mandible, your chin, and he's checking to see if he can find any swollen or hard lymph nodes there. They'll be like little nodules. And then they'll check under your armpit, because you see that there are clusters of nodes there also. And if you have a really bad infection, those nodes are going to be very active. Bacteria are going to be in them, and a lot of white blood cells are there. Little wars going on in those nodes, and it's going to tend to reduce the fluid flow and fill up with cells. And so they'll be nice and firm. Now, superficial and deep lymphatics converge to form larger trunks, which empty into the thoracic duct, and see I have it circled there, thoracic duct, and the right lymphatic duct, So all your lymphatics are going to converge there. So let's look over on another page. You can see a little better. Here's the thoracic duct here. A lot of your lower lymphatics join to form this one, and it's going to come up here and empty into the left subclavian. And you look at the right lymphatic duct, and the right lymphatic duct is going to collect, from the right side of the body above the diaphragm and drains into the right subclavian. So reading in your notes, the first blank says thoracic duct collects lymph from the body below the diaphragm and from the left side of the body above the diaphragm and drains into the left subclavian. So it's not going to be an equal drainage. If you look at this guy again, you'll see that the pink side is the thoracic duct. The left side of the head, neck, chest, left arm, left abdomen, and everything below the diaphragm drains into that thoracic duct, which will drain the lymph into the left subclavian. The right lymphatic duct is going to drain the right head, right neck, right arm, and right chest into the right subclavian. So it's not an equilateral drainage. They don't drain equal parts of the body. And there they are again. So let's look at just some more information. T cells, that goes in your blank. T, the capital letter T, and then a dash in cells, stands for thymus-dependent cells. Approximately 80% of the circulating lymphocytes are T cells. And like I told you on another slide set, that's what HIV wipes out, is your T cells. And let's see what the T cells do. It said 80% of the circulating lymphocytes. So let's look at that. Cytotoxic T cells, and here they are up at the top, cytotoxic T cells, attack foreign cells or cells infected with a virus. Okay. Helper T cells, which they don't show on here, stimulate the activation and function of T and B cells. So it starts to get the immune system up and running. And suppressor T cells, SUPRESSOR T cells, inhibit the activation and function of T and Bs. That means that the suppressors are going to help to control the activity of the helper cells and the cytotoxic T cells. If you look at the activity here, it says infected cell, cytotoxic T cell, it's going to bind with it, going to release enzymes that will, they're called perforins in this case. It says promote apoptosis. Is going to punch holes in it, and you see it leaking on the number 3. So it's killing it by punching holes in the cell membrane, and the cytoplasm leaks out and the cell dies. These cells have direct contact with the compromised cell. And you see the picture 1, there's your direct contact. Helper and suppressor Ts establish and control the sensitivity of the immune response. It has to be controlled, otherwise it could gear up and become an autoimmune response, and your own body would attack itself. Your immune system would attack your body. T cells are the primary cells involved in the production of cell-mediated immunity or cellular immunity. The cell's actually doing the work. That's why it's called cellular immunity, CELLULAR, immunity. Well, let's look down here. Here's a helper T cell, and something's happening. This B cell is being stimulated. And let's look at B cells. That's your next blank. Capital letter B dash cells stands for bone marrow derived cells. Approximately 10% of the circulating lymphocytes. Okay, quite a bit fewer. Most occupy the lymph nodes, the spleen, and lymphoid tissues. When stimulated, like this one's being stimulated here right now, they differentiate into plasma cells. Now look to the left and you see plasma, P-L-A-S-M-A, cells, which produce antibodies against foreign antigens. So the plasma cells are going to produce antibodies against the antigen that it was exposed to initially, which was up here at the top left. Most antigens are proteins, but some are lipids, polysaccharides, or nucleic acids. Most of the ones that we will look at and that I've ever looked at were proteins. B cells are responsible for antibody-mediated immunity. Those are the plasma cells making antibodies that are going to go into this plasma. Or humoral, H-U-M-O-R-A-L, which means liquid, immunity, because the antibodies are found in body liquids. So there's a difference between cellular immunity and humoral immunity. Cellular has to do with the cells themselves taking out the infected cells, killing them. And humoral has to do with the B cells being stimulated to become plasma cells that make antibodies, which are in the plasma. So it's not the cell, it's the antibodies that are in the plasma, so it's called humoral immunity in the fluid. Now, some more cells that are not shown on this slide. NK cells stands for natural killer cells. Approximately 5 to 10% of the circulating lymphocytes. These lymphocytes will attack foreign cells, normal cells infected with the virus, and cancer cells that appear in normal tissue. This policing of the natural killer cells is called immunological surveillance. Again, the lifespan, approximately 80% live 4 to 20 years, and again, that's dependent upon the activity and the health of that individual. If that individual is healthy, these cells are going to last a lot longer. If you're perpetually sick and you have bad, hygiene, you're going to be sick a lot, and your immune system will last a shorter amount of time. The better health you stay in as you're young, your immune system will be with you more when you're older. If you wear out your immune system when you're young, you're going to have a worn out system when you're older. It's like a car. It ages over time, okay? You take care of it, it'll last a long time. You don't take care of it and it wears out. So we have lymph structures. Let's just see. Lymphopoiesis occurs in bone marrow, the thymus, and peripheral lymphatic tissues, the formation of these lymph cells. Hematocytoblast, there's that cell again, that stem cell. Divisions in the bone marrow of an adult generate the lymphocytic stem cells responsible for the production of all types of lymphocytes. I'll be back in the blood cell lecture. Lymph nodes, here's some put up here already. Structures along the lymph system which filter lymph. They contain many phagocytic cells, as do vessels containing the lymph. So lymph vessels and these nodes contain phagocytic cells. Now they're not very big, 0.04 to 1 inch in length. Okay. Lymph nodes are concentrated in the groin, the axilla, and the cervical area. If you remember seeing this picture here, the groin, axilla, your armpit, and the cervical area, your neck. So they're going to be kind of concentrated in those areas. Now what I drew here is one node here and a new node here, but let's just keep reading and we'll define some of these things. Even though there are phagocytes lining the lymph vessels, they will eventually lead to lymph nodes containing more lymphocytes and filtration. Now, I have an A for this vessel here. You see the valve is all these are one-way valves. Valve is entering into the lymph node. This is a very simplistic drawing of a lymph node on the left. That's called an afferent vessel. A-F-F-E-R-E-N-T. The vessels leading into the lymph node. So that's an afferent on my drawing on the left. And look on the right. There's an afferent leading in on the one on the right. And you can see the valve is arranged to where it will only let the lymph move one direction into that node. Now look at the vessel leaving. It has an E on it with an arrow leaving. That's called an efferent vessel. E-F-F-E-R-E-N-T. The vessel which exits the node. Now the nodes contain many lymphocytes. Number one is germinal center, GC right here. Germinal, G-E-R-M-I-N-A-L. Second word is center, C-E-N-T-E-R. Contains growing lymphocytes. This is where the lymphocytes are growing. And then the little tails here, the little black tails here of this mass of cells these are called medullary cords. M-E-D-U-L-L-A-R-Y. Second word, C-O-R-D-S. These are functional lymphocytes, and the fluid that's entering the afferent vessel will pass over these medullary cords, and the phagocytes will be exposed to anything that doesn't belong there and will phagocytose and remove what should not be in that lymph. And then the lymph will exit out the efferent vessel and leave the node to go into another vessel, which will lead it to another node, and the same thing will happen again. Now there are two components. Let's look at the next slide. Well, let's look at this one first, I guess. The stroma. What is the stroma? Number one is stroma. S-T-R-O-M-A. A connective tissue capsule or network which separates the organ, the lymph node, into compartments. This is non-functional tissue, which is not going to be involved in anything other than forming the structure, the housing for that node. And it's composed of trabeculae, which is what the T is here. It means beam, or like in this case, it's a little wall, a dividing compartment, and a capsule, the covering. So this node it has a covering on it called a capsule, and then the internal compartment is divided into well, internal space is converted into compartments by these trabeculae. Number two, parenchyma. P-A-R-E-N-C-H-Y-M-A. P-A-R-E-N-C-H-Y-M-A. The functional cells. Those are the functional cells that we saw earlier. Remember the medullary cords contain the functional cells. Germinal centers and medullary cords. That's the parenchyma. So it contains both of them, all the functional cells, the germinal center and the medullary cord. The nodes are about, 25 millimeters in diameter. That's about an inch. That's what I just said earlier. They could be up to an inch. Besides lymphocytes in the nodes, there are also macrophages. M-A-C-R-O-P-H-A-G-E-S. They are large cells. These are large lymphocytes, like monocytes and neutrophils in general, even lymphocytes, which eat or engulf things foreign to the body. So on this picture here, we can see the germinal centers, the little light pink areas here. We can see the medullary cords, these little tails labeled over here. I have that circled on the right, medullary cords. We can see while we're there, we can see the afferent vessel on the top or left. See how the valves are directed toward it, pushing the fluid or allowing it to flow into the node. And on the right-hand side, these are the efferent vessels, and the valves allow the fluid to leave. We have the capsule on the outside, and at the very bottom has I circled capsule. And we have the dividing walls called trabeculae, which compartmentalize this node to keep the germinal centers and the medullary cords compartmentalized. There is also an indention. An indention in an organ where vessels enter and or exit an organ is called a hilus or a hilum, H-I-L-U-M or H-I-L-U-S. Means the same thing. An invagination in an organ where vessels enter or exits the organ. Vessels are entering or exiting. In this case, they don't show the same spot. On my drawing I did, on this one they don't, but this one they are showing a hilus here. Notice how the nodes are distributed around the body. Well, let's look at that picture again. Distributed around the body, all around the body. You see that when fluids are collected from the arm, from the hand and the forearm, they're filtered by the axilla all the way up to the cervical, possibly some of that, and then it goes into the subclavians. From the groin, you have nodes in the groin and the abdomen area. It's filtered all the way back up to the left subclavian. So it's being constantly filtered. On the, here we go, this last one here. The breast cancer. Fat pads which sit between the skin and the muscle. Okay. We have a lot of lymphatics that are, you see it's got a little web-like network into the tissues there of lymphatics. Cancer will more easily invade a lymph vessel than a vein. Why? Because lymph vessels are thinner. They're more delicate, remember? They can be larger, but they're also thinner. They're more delicate. And so if cancer is going on in this breast here, it could enter into a vessel and then go to these nodes. And so when a female has breast cancer, oftentimes they'll take a sample and then they will test the nodes and see how far out the cancer cells are captured in those nodes. and they'll remove those nodes. Axillary nodes are most likely to stop most of the cells. And so they have to be careful, don't take out too many nodes, otherwise that part of the body will be puffy because it can't remove as much fluid as the other side of your body. I had a friend who had a mastectomy, and her cancer was so bad they took them out in the axilla also. And she has to wear an ACE bandage on her upper and lower arm for the rest of her life. I saw her without that bandage on, and her arm, I'm not even kidding, was twice as big as her other arm. So she would have to raise her arm to force those fluids by gravity into her chest cavity to be drained off, and then have somebody else help to get that bandage around her forearm and her upper arm and tighten it over a period of probably several hours to correct that problem, because she no longer has these lymph nodes to drain fluids from her arm. So she's going to have to wear that bandage for the rest of her life. This is the end of part 1 of your lymph notes.